Hello everyone, I'm very glad that you listened to my story. Please give me a follow and like the video if you enjoyed it. Feel free to comment and provide feedback so I can improve the sound quality. Yes, I will now continue the unfinished story Ghost in the Forest. The Horror Secret of the Old House is a book about a young woman who clears out her dead grandmother's home in rural North Carolina. She finds long-hidden secrets about a strange colony of beings in the forest. When Mouse's father asks her to clean out her dead grandmother's house, she agrees. After all, how bad can it be? The answer: pretty bad. She was a hoarder, and her house was filled with useless junk. That's terrifying enough, but there's more to it than that. Mouse stumbles upon her uncle's diary, which at first seems to be filled with meaningless grumbling until Mouse encounters some of the terrifying things he describes himself. Alone in the woods with her dog, Mouse finds herself facing a series of impossible horrors because sometimes the things that go bump in the night are real and they are looking for you. And if she doesn't face them head-on, she might not survive to tell the story. 21. I had to pick Bongo up and carry him. He would not walk into that doorway. I wanted to walk into it even less, but no one was giving me a choice. Be ready, Anna had said. Our escape lay on the other side of whatever happened next. Assuming she wasn't betraying us. Assuming that there was any way to betray us since we couldn't get much more captive than we were. Assuming that she hadn't been lying for some strange purpose of her own. Assumption after assumption. But all I could do was go forward, not back. I could not explain any of this to Bongo, so I picked him up in my arms. He whined miserably against my shoulder. I felt as if I was betraying him. I also felt as if my back was going to give out, but surely I only needed to get him inside. After that, he'd probably be eager to leave under his own power. I walked forward through the crowd of effigies. 20, at least. Maybe more. They blurred together at the edges. It felt like I was walking a gauntlet. Living junk turned its head and watched me, and everywhere I heard the soft, thoughtful clicking. Please, I prayed, to any god that might be able to hear me in this place. Please let my dog live. Anna had said we'd make a break for it after we came out of the building. That implied we'd come out again, didn't it? It's just a building. It's probably like a temple or something. We just need to go in and then we'll come out again. Bongo can get away. He can outrun them, I bet. Foxy and I, well, Foxy's got that gun. Surely she can take care of herself. Which left me as the deadweight, but I expected that. The doorway to the building loomed in front of me. It wasn't a pitch-black opening. It was grey and layered, and I could see a little way inside. When I stepped over the threshold, my feet crackled on the surface below. It looked like I didn't know, like something oddly familiar. Handmade paper, the kind you get with bits of leaf pressed into it or papier-mâché. Something like that. The building wasn't silent. At first I thought it was Bongo's trembling against my chest that made it seem to move, and then I realized that there was a thrumming sound, like distant machinery. Machines here. It didn't make any sense, but what did in this place? Foxy stepped in behind me. Better keep moving, Hon, she said quietly. There's a big one behind us, and I think it means business. I didn't look over my shoulder. It wouldn't do me any good to look at it. Orpheus and Lot's wife might have been unable to resist looking back, but I was done. Bongo's heartbeat raced against my chest. It's okay, I lied to him. It's okay. I won't let anything happen to you. The corridor was square at first. It seemed like the material had been layered over the interior of one of the stone buildings. Then it opened out into a room, rectangular but with the corners softened with drifts of the paper material. The ceiling was full of twigs, like a mass of bird nests all woven together. It was hard to tell if the gigantic wicker structure on top had been built or had simply grown there. There were no leaves on the twigs, but maybe that didn't mean anything. There were no leaves on the trees around the Vorish dome, either. There was a second opening on the far side of the room. It was an irregular circle, and I had my doubts that it was part of the original stone building. The twigs ran down to meet it, and the odd pulpy grey layers were built up around it. I shifted Bongo against my hip, trying to see over him so that I didn't catch my footing, and suddenly I realized what the material reminded me of. "Foxy," I said softly. "Yeah, this is a paper wasp nest, isn't it?" "Think so, Hon. If the wasps were the size of horses." This was not a comforting thought, but I had pretty much given up on comforting thoughts by this point. Anna stood framed in the circular opening. She had halted. As I watched, she took a deep breath, lifted her head, and stepped forward. We followed. Bongo had gone completely limp. I heaved him up so that his paws were on my shoulder and I could take more of his weight on my hip. If his heart hadn't been hammering against my collarbone, I would have worried that he was dead. The circular tunnel sloped upward and was ribbed like a throat. That was another thought I wished I hadn't had. I wanted to slow down, but Foxy was right behind me, one hand on my backpack, and I knew something had to be right behind her. It went around and around, like a spiral staircase. It wasn't as dark as it should have been. The paper let light through, maybe, or reflected it differently. The air was full of diffuse grey light, like the horizon just before dawn. There were carvings on the walls here too. I say carvings. Bas-relief made of paper sculpture, something like that. Easier to carve than stone, I suppose. The same as inside the corridors, the tall figures, the small ones at their feet. Not all the small figures were human. Some of them looked like dogs or goats or maybe horses, some kind of four-legged animal, but scaled down. All of them walking up alongside us in a great spiral, the large ones getting fewer and fewer, the small ones continuing on. Ahead of us, the tunnel opened up. Anna paused in the tunnel mouth. There was a light source in front of her, turning her into a black paper cutout. I didn't want to touch her, but I was being pushed ahead, so I cleared my throat. She stepped to one side and I came out, carrying my dog, into the heart of the building. You think really stupid things when you're horrified beyond belief. In this case, I thought, of course. Building. You think it's a noun, but it's also a verb. That's what was happening here. Building. The nest rose up on all sides, over a vast open space. We stood on the roof of the stone building and looked over the edge. The effigies had sheared down through what had once been a street, and the building continued for an unknown distance below. It didn't fall away into darkness, though. Darkness would have been an improvement. The pit was filled with material, a mound of junk, of twigs and bone and discarded wire, skulls and pebbles, feathers and dead leaves. And it was alive. The surface rippled like a pregnant animal's sides, heaving with contractions. Effigies picked their way across the mound like water bugs skating on the surface of a pond, tugging bits loose, binding them together. I watched two creatures like praying mantises with cow skulls for heads, working on a pile of clay that moved and squirmed under their claws, as they wrenched it into a shape I couldn't begin to fathom, then jabbed sticks into it, sticks and stones and broken bones, while it writhed in what looked like pain. Wed wondered who made them, and suddenly it was obvious. They were making themselves. I thought of the white people in the Green Book, the Holla people, making puppets to serve them. The Holla people having children with ordinary humans, and the white stone growing fewer and fewer as their blood grew thinner and thinner. The human figures surrounded by smaller ones. Not children, but their servants. Made things and the ones who made them. And one day the Holla people were gone, but their servants remained, and the servants began to replace themselves over and over, the puppets building puppets of their own, growing farther and farther removed from any human hand, the small figures walking up the spiral, no longer human or animal, continuing on and on and on alone. "Look up," said Foxy softly. "Or maybe don't." I looked up. Hundreds of effigies hung from the top of the nest, the way the deerskull effigy had hung from the tree. They dangled on the ends of ropes like silent wind chimes. Anna walked to the very edge of the roof. The two humped, headless ones flanked her like an honor guard. She said, "I have brought the interlopers." I didn't know what to expect next. For the mound to start talking, for it to open monstrous eyes and roll over and be an effigy made from the bones of giants, for the ground to open up and swallow us whole. None of those things happened. If they had, I would probably have broken right there. Instead, the effigies behind us fanned out around us. More and more streamed through the doorway, the entire crowd that had been around the building, a hall of wire and bone horrors. The ones working began to slow. The praying mantises paused in their assembly, holding the twitching, headless body of their child between them. The ones hanging from the ceiling began to sway. Clicking echoed from all around us. The praying mantises tapped their long twig fingers on their hollow skulls. Hagstones rattled in the rib cages of the hanging ones. The mud-auber effigy stood closest to me and shuddered its body so that the mud tunnels chattered together like teeth. I didn't ask what they were doing, because this, too, was blindingly obvious. They were talking. Sticks and stones, sticks and stones, sticks and stones, and talking bones. A rattled discussion went on all around us, click, 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 like the voices of monstrous insects, giant cicadas humming in the heat. Anna folded her arms in front of her and listened. "What are they saying?" I croaked. "The puppets are deciding whether to keep you," she said. "They can't do that." My voice sounded very calm and conversational, as if I could convince Anna and the effigies that holding us prisoner was some kind of social faux pas. "The alternative is to take you apart for materials." Foxy swore. The clicking grew louder and more agitated. The ones swaying from the ceiling began to clatter together, introducing discordant notes. A heated discussion. Did they have emotions? Did they get angry, happy, sad, frightened? Did it matter? "The newer ones say that you can perhaps be bred to make more masters," said Anna. "The old ones say that they must wait for better stock. Masters bred from your flesh will be weak, even with the white stone, as mine have become weak. The newer ones say that even those can be used for materials." If I had not had Bongo in my arms, I might have panicked. Things were going a bit grey around the edges. They were talking about using me as a broodmare for however long someone lived under the Vorish dome. But I had Bongo, and I couldn't panic because I had to take care of him, even if the flesh under discussion was trying to crawl off my body in sheer disgust. "The dog and the old one will be made into bones," she continued. Her voice was flat and emotionless. "They will be given the task to guard you." Her voice acquired some faint sheen of emotion, one I couldn't place an honor. I looked at the two headless effigies beside her. It occurred to me that they walked beside her nearly every time I saw her, and I finally thought to wonder what had gone into their construction. Or who. I clutched Bongo against me. His eyes were closed and he was panting in the last extremes of distress. "We will await your decision," said Anna to the crawling, clicking building. She turned and stalked back the way we had come, no longer stately but angry, her face flushed, eyes glinting. Is she mad that they're going to kill us? I'd have liked to think that. I really would have. But she didn't look worried. She looked thwarted. Was she hoping for something else, hoping they'd let us go? Hoping they'd let her go? Oh. I don't know why it took me so long to realize what she intended. My only defense is that the building had been so shocking that I wasn't thinking clearly. But finally, everything clicked together in my head. Kilroy was here. Then she left, that bitch. You aren't one of us, are you? Anna hadn't really called for help. She'd called for someone to take her place. And I had blundered in thinking that somebody needed rescue and stupid enough to think that I might be the person to do the rescuing. Me, lacking any blood of the Holler people in my veins. Because Copgrave was my step-grandfather, and that was an inelegant phrase, and we'd all stopped using it and gone to other words, and maybe had been too confused at the end anyway to explain. And now we were trapped in here with her. She'd talked about running, but she'd been talking to Foxy. Foxy, whom she'd tried to keep out completely. Had she expected to trade me and be free? Had she assessed the situation and figured that it would be easier to get out with Foxy helping, that maybe the effigies wouldn't try to get her back if they had me instead? I stared at her shoulders. If she could feel my eyes boring holes between her shoulder blades, she gave no sign. She led the way down the spiral staircase, and I wanted to turn and run in the other direction, but that way lay the effigies and the building and the creatures copying themselves in wood and bone, waiting for their masters to return. So Foxy and I walked behind her. Uriah followed us, looking oddly lost without his escort. The two headless ones were with us. The rest of the effigies were gathered around the edge of the roof, engaging in their wordless conversation as they argued over whether to take us all apart into bones. Anna had said that fewer of them would come with us after we went to the building. This was certainly the least number I'd seen since we entered the Voorish Dome. How long would it take for them to decide? Minutes, hours, years? I didn't want to stick around to find out. If we were going to escape, it had to be as soon as we left the building. We might never get another chance. I hoped Foxy was ready, too. Don't be ridiculous. Foxy's probably way ahead of you. You're not the one who packs sandwiches and a handgun on this little jaunt. The CIA had really missed out when they hadn't hired her. We'd probably be toppling governments on Mars by now. We reached the square room. I set Bongo down because my back was going to give out. He was shaking badly, but he lunged for the end of the leash, pulling to get out of the building. "In with you, buddy," I muttered. "I want out of here too." I looked back at Foxy and jerked my head just a little in the direction of the door. She nodded, reached out, and grabbed Anna's wrist. Anna looked briefly startled. Her brilliant red eyes flashed human brown and back again. Foxy put her lips next to Anna's ear and hissed something. Anna started to shake her head, but Foxy's grip on her wrist tightened. I could see polished nails digging into bone-weight flesh. Anna gave me a look that was pure rage and then seemed to deflate. She nodded once to Foxy. Foxy released her. "She won't do anything stupid now," she muttered, stepping in front of me. "Or it'll make her wish them things had kept her." Apparently I wasn't the only one who had worked out Anna's plan to use me as a replacement. Were we still going to run? Was she hoping that between the three of us we could get far enough away that the effigies wouldn't find her? What was going on behind those red-brown eyes? If I get far enough away, they'll give up. They have to give up. Dear God, I hoped she was right about that. I followed Foxy, following Anna. My stomach was churning with anticipation and terror. I could hear the tapping of the headless effigies following behind Foxy. Would we run as soon as we got to the door outside the door down the street? Would Foxy give me a sign? Would I recognize the sign? Was I supposed to give her a sign? The layered paper crunched under my feet as I crossed the threshold. Anna had stopped a few feet from the opening. Bongo and I came out, and Foxy followed. I looked back over my shoulder and saw Uriah in the gloom, walking forward. Without a word, without so much as a gesture, Anna reached down and picked up something lying at her feet. It was a jagged piece of rebar. I wondered how long ago she'd placed it there, waiting for her moment. She took 3 steps forward. Her skin was bone-weight, and the moire pattern blossomed around her like heat haze as she slammed the makeshift spear into Uriah's chest. 22. He fell backward. The blood was astonishingly bright on his white skin, and then he vanished into the grey shadows inside the building. My first thought was that it had been an accident. This was incredibly stupid. I think I knew even at the time that it was stupid, but my brain just wasn't equipped to handle a murder happening in front of me. Therefore it couldn't have been a murder. Therefore it was an accident. Therefore we had to get help and call an ambulance, and I took a step toward Uriah, and Foxy grabbed my arm. My brain's frantic hamster wheel running stopped. There were no ambulances in this place. There would be no help. Anna had murdered the other whole person in cold blood because it would make it easier to escape, or he deserved it, or she hated him for reasons of her own, and it didn't matter because Foxy was dragging me now and Bongo was hauling on the end of the leash and we had to run. So we ran. Bongo had his back humped and his tail between his legs, but he still moved faster than any of us, choking as he strained against the collar. I couldn't run fast enough to keep him from doing it, but I did my best. "It's all right," I gasped as Foxy nearly stumbled trying to keep hold of me. "You can let go. I'm okay now." "Good," she said. Gave me a turn there. "Hold on to your hickory." I reached down the neck of my shirt and grabbed the string of wooden beads tighter. In my head, I saw Uriah falling back again and again. I hadn't known him. He was worse than a stranger, but it had been so fast, so irrevocable, I couldn't process it. I had to keep looking at the memory over and over, trying to make it real. Anna was a pale shape in front of us, running through the dark streets. She paused for us to catch up, her fierce eyes narrowing. "Why?" I gasped. "Why kill him?" She laughed. Her eyes flashed inhuman red. "To slow them down. They'll pay respects. They have to. It's why they exist. Now hurry." She took off again, dodging around a corner, and I ran, thinking of the small carved figures with their hands over their faces in grief. Would they mourn for Uriah? Would it buy us a little time? Probably. Probably not as much time as if the effigies had decided to take me in trade. I don't trust her, I thought, and then I would have laughed at myself if I'd had enough breath, because it didn't matter if I trusted her or not, did it? I wasn't getting any better offers. I had no idea where we were in the dead city, but I could see a line of trees ahead and above us. Was that the hillside we'd come down from, the place of white stones? Hard to tell. We came such a long way, I thought bitterly. Were we being pursued? I risked a glance over my shoulder, but the lights were too erratically placed. I didn't hear clicking, but surely the effigies couldn't be far behind. I thought we might go back on the switchback path, but Anna made straight for the trees, scrambling up and over a low wall. Bongo went over the wall like an antelope. I didn't. It was only about shoulder height, but I had to leap and get my arms up on it, with my dog still yanking on the leash. Adrenaline came to my rescue. I don't know that I could have done it if I hadn't been terrified and listening for pursuit. Also, Foxy got her shoulder under my ass and shoved. "Didn't know we had that kind of relationship, Foxy," I panted. "We live through this, hon. I'll even fart in front of you." We were making jokes. We were making jokes while, in the back of my mind, a man fell down with a makeshift spear through his chest, blood on white skin. We were making jokes while unspeakable things chased us in the dark. Maybe that's why we were making jokes. I leaned down and caught her arm, hauling her up. My biceps screamed, but to hell with them. Foxy teetered on the edge of the wall as one of her heels slipped, then got both feet up. I looked over her shoulder as I pulled and saw movement. "Effigy," I croaked. Foxy swore, swung around, and drew her gun. The two headless, four-legged ones that followed Anna came into view. I heard a hiss behind me as Anna saw them. "Will bullets stop them?" I asked. "Let's find out," said Foxy, taking aim. The gunshot woke echoes in the city like birds. Anna cried out, whether in surprise or grief, I couldn't tell. The first bullet plumped into the body of the lead effigy. It staggered sideways but kept coming. Its partner took the lead, the slack fabric of the neck beginning to sway back and forth as if something inside was reaching through. They reached the wall and stood on their hind legs. The shot had knocked a hole out of the side of the first one. It leaked rags and sand and what looked like bits of pine needle and bark chips. Foxy shot the second one in the shoulder, shattering the socket. It collapsed on that side against the wall. The fabric began to move, more agitated, and I swore I heard something snuffling inside. "Anna," said Foxy, over her shoulder. I looked up and saw, to my astonishment, that Anna's dead wet face was slicked with tears. "Do it," she said, her voice shaking. "It's the only way." Foxy emptied the clip into the effigies. She focused on the legs. They both fell, kicking feebly. The snuffling noises grew louder, and whatever was inside them began to jerk and twitch. I didn't ask what it was. I had a horrible suspicion already. 5 drew no breaths of the other 2, but we will speak of that later. We hadn't spoken of it after all. I hoped we never would. Foxy slammed the empty gun back in her purse. Come on, she said. They'll have heard that. We took off into the leafless forest. The ground was dry and crackling underfoot. A whole army of effigies could have been after us, and I wouldn't have been able to hear any of them over the sound of our footsteps and my own ragged breathing. Bongo was back to dragging me up the hillside. The slope was steeper than it had looked on the endless switchbacks. There was no undergrowth, though, which helped. The trees were stark black in the grey, grim light. Foxy began to fall behind. I didn't know whether to slow down or not. Foxy, I'm still here, she said. You want to take Bongo? Hell help pull you. I'm busy reloading, on, and doing that while running is violating everything my granny ever taught me, but thanks. And indeed, in a few minutes she caught back up again, and damn near started to outpace my dog and me. I don't know how long we ran. Pain began to jab through my side with every step. How long would the effigies be arguing? Were they coming after us now? Were the things that hung from the ceiling even now detaching themselves, crawling over one another and down the walls, in a wave of clicking, rattling horror? I looked over my shoulder and saw only darkness. Was it moving? I couldn't look long enough to tell. The footing was too uneven and Bongo wasn't slowing down. Anna, I called. Are we close? She turned her head to answer. I heard not much far, and then something crashed through the trees to our left. Bongo screamed. If you've never heard a dog scream before, you're lucky. It started like a bay but went high and terrible. He pulled up short, and I threw myself over him, desperate to get between my dog and whatever the crashing thing was. Foxy yelled, "Get down," but I was already down. It was probably for the best, because I heard a gunshot over my head and actually felt heat hit the back of my neck. I might have been imagining that, I don't know. The muzzle flash illuminated the fan-headed effigy. I don't know how much damage the shot did. There wasn't enough light to tell. All I knew was that Foxy grabbed me by the collar and yanked me upright, and Bongo was running again, nearly breaking my neck as his leash got tangled in my legs, but we straightened out somehow, and Anna was shouting, and suddenly in front of us, a sight I'd never thought would be welcome, lay the edge of the trees and the beginning of the hill of white stones. There was no moon in the sky, but the light on the hill was cold and blue and looked more like moonlight than it looked like anything else. The stones glowed white, and the twisted carvings moved and wriggled and shifted in the corner of my eyes as if they would come to life at any moment. My side ached like someone had jammed a knife in it, or a piece of rebar sharpened like a spear, but the sight of the hill gave me a burst of energy. We ran. The wicker tunnel, I gasped. Back to the house. What good being at the house was going to do me, I don't know, except that my truck was there. If I could get to the truck, I'd throw Foxy and Anna and Bongo in it and drive until we ran out of gas. Surely the effigies couldn't chase us that far, or if they did, I could get to other people. Other people seemed like a talisman. I'd go to a mall or a Walmart or something. Surely unholy abominations wouldn't follow me to Walmart. The white stone loomed before us. Even if I hadn't been wrapped in hickory beads, I doubt I'd have felt anything but disgust. We skidded around the edge of the depression and kept going. On your right, said Foxy, cool as a cucumber, and I looked over and saw a dark shape running alongside us. Flanking, not moving in. Foxy shot at it, missed, swore, and then managed to put another bullet in it. It fell down and rolled down the hillside. I didn't stay long enough to see if it got up again. It was easier going now. The ground was less treacherous and easier to see. Unfortunately, I was also starting to hit the last of my strength. Even Bongo was slowing down, his panting turning into a wheeze. Foxy had one hand on her chest, the other holding the gun by her side. "Foxy, don't you worry," she panted. "I ain't dying yet." "Anna, we have to rest," I yelled. She turned. She was the color of bone in the moonless moonlight, and her eyes glinted. She didn't say a word, just pointed. I looked over my shoulder and saw them. A tide of effigies poured over the hillside toward us. I couldn't see where one left off and one began, only a wave of clicking sticks and bones, heaving like the sea. Suddenly I wasn't tired anymore. Bongo was surprised to find there was slack on the leash suddenly, but he didn't complain. I think at that moment, in sheer terror, I could have picked Foxy up and carried her. We tore past the 3 stones lying on the ground. The litany of the twisted ones started up in my head in time to my stride. And I twisted myself around like the twisted ones, but it didn't quite match, and my mind fell back on something else. Sticks and stones and broken bones, sticks and stones and broken bones, and I heard another gunshot from somewhere, and then the wicker tunnel was right there, and I ran for it. Anna skidded to a halt in front of it. I wanted to scream at her, to demand to know why she was stopping. She had to go through, and then I saw it. The Muddleber effigy stood in front of the tunnel mouth, blocking the way. I stopped. I knew the tide of effigies was getting closer behind us, but all I could think of was Foxy and her gun. It took far too long for Foxy to arrive, and her skin had an unhealthy grey tint, or maybe it was the unmoonlight. But she looked at the effigy and grunted and raised her pistol. Anna was looking behind us, and I didn't dare look because I knew the tide of effigies was far too close, and at any moment they were going to break over us like the sea. The gunshots sounded like they came from a long way away, or maybe I was deaf from the previous shots. Of course, I was supposed to wear ear protection, I thought vaguely, which, going back to what I said earlier about thinking very insipid things when in mortal terror. The Muddleber staggered sideways and fell down. It wasn't dead. It grabbed for Bongo as he passed, and one of those long stick legs closed over my dog's haunch. I shrieked in rage and stomped down on the sticks, hearing them crunch under my boot. The Muddleber effigy made an almost mechanical buzzing noise, legs drawing up like a dying spider, but I stomped on it again, because how dare it touch my dog? Foxy was already in the tunnel. Bongo was cowering at her feet. I turned to find Anna, to yell go, and something grabbed me from behind. The grip was inhumanly strong and spun me around. I looked down at my arms, expecting to see bone and twig, expecting to scream in horror. I saw hands. The tide of effigies broke around us, became a semicircle of staring, eyeless horrors, and Anna held me pinned in the mouth of the tunnel. Bongo's leash was still around my left wrist, and my arm twisted painfully backward as he tugged on it. "Take her," she shouted. "Let me go, I'm done, you hear me? I brought you a replacement. It's not my fault she isn't good enough. I can't do what you want anymore. Now let me go." Well, it's not like I hadn't guessed. What a disappointment it must have been when I arrived, when it looked like the effigies had decided I wouldn't make a replacement after all. "They won't take me," I said. "They won't. You know they won't." "Shut up." I could feel Anna's chest against my back, hear her breath rasping in and out. She was shaking violently. The effigies, by contrast, stood like statues, unmoving. For a moment it seemed as if they were nothing but a mad artist's assemblage, nothing that had ever been or could ever be alive. Then one, then another began to click. Anna's shaking increased until I was vibrating with it too. The clicking spread throughout the crowd, a parliament of beetles rattling their shells together. I felt something under my heel and realized I was standing on the Muddleber's leg again, and half dead, blown apart, it was still opening and closing its twig fingers. I recoiled, horrified. Anna's grip was slipping. I could feel her shaking her head. "No," she whispered. "No, oh no." "I can't shoot her, Hon," said Foxy softly. "Not without hitting you." The clicking grew louder and louder. I watched an effigy in the foreground turn its head sideways and let it ratchet backward, ticking like a clock. Bongo pulled on the leash again. and I twisted myself around like the twisted ones. There is a trick that dog owners do with a leash. You've seen it done. Very likely you've done it yourself. It's a kind of pirouette where the dog has wrapped the leash around you and you spin to unwrap it. Otherwise the leash is around your legs and you're hobbled and likely to fall over. Bongo's leash was behind Anna's legs. I sent him a silent apology, yanked my left arm forward so that the leash pulled tight, and threw myself backward. She shrieked and fell. I landed on top of her. Bongo yelped in outrage. Something popped inside my wrist. The effigies took a step forward, clicking. I rolled sideways over my injured wrist. It hurt like blazes, but Anna had lost her grip on my arms. I started to crawl toward the tunnel, trying to drag the leash out from under her as I went. Foxy grabbed my shoulders, hauling me into the tunnel. Bongo was yanking on the leash, and every tug felt like someone was hitting my wrist with a hammer. Behind me, Anna began to scream. I heard Foxy emptying her gun. The report deafened me. I crawled away into the wicker tunnel, my head ringing and my wrist throbbing, trying to get to my knees so that I could pull the leash off my left wrist. Bongo barked furiously, which didn't help at all. Then Foxy was picking me up and I somehow got the leash transferred and we staggered together down the tunnel. She said something, but I couldn't hear it over the ringing in my head. A long time later, it seemed to me, I realized that Anna's screaming had stopped. I didn't know when it had stopped. Maybe when Foxy had fired her gun. Leaning on each other like two drunks in a three-legged race, we stumbled toward the bottom of the tunnel. I knew it couldn't have been more than a few minutes, but it seemed to take an age of the earth. My lungs were raw from running, a pain that I welcomed because it had nothing to do with the pain in my wrist. Are they following us? I asked. Don't know. Don't think so. Bongo seemed to agree with her. He wasn't running, but shuffling along, nose to the ground, a tired dog ready to go home. It occurred to me that it was a good thing he was a coonhound. A border collie would still be up on the hillside, trying to herd the effigies into the proper formation. Although a border collie might have been smart enough not to go up the hill in the first place, so it was probably a wash. Why wouldn't they follow us? I wondered out loud. Maybe we don't have anything they want. No, I didn't have anything they wanted. My blood was all human and I was no replacement for Anna. We reached the bottom of the tunnel. Our footing evened out. Bongo threaded through the opening and led us into the dark trees. Think we can get somebody to come back here and brick this thing up? I asked. I couldn't make out Fox's face in the moonlight, but I felt her frown. Not sure you can brick up a bunch of dead trees, but we can give it a go. Skip might know. We were relying on Bongo now to get us home. It was dark and I had no idea where we were. I kept listening for the woodpecker knock of Haxton's, but I didn't hear a thing. Is it over? Is it ever going to be over? At last, far in the distance, I saw a light. ID left the back porch light on. It looked like a beacon. The real world. The normal world. Even if it was my grandmother's horrible hoarder house, it was just a dead woman with too much stuff. There were thousands of them in the real world, and it was a thing that real people dealt with. I blinked back tears. We hobbled around the side of the house. Bongo was starting to pull again. He wanted dinner. I wanted to fall down and not get up again for days. Years. Maybe ever. I took a step up onto the porch. And stopped. The front door was open. 23. The screen was pushed back against the wall, and the inner door stood wide. The hallway was a square of darkness. Foxy, I said quietly, tell me that Tomas and Skip came over to the house while we were gone. Don't know, Hon. She reached into her purse and took out the gun. Have you got any more bullets? No. I pulled Bongo back from the porch. Let's go to my place, said Foxy. Worse comes to worse, we can. I never did find out what we could do because I caught a flash of movement over her shoulder. The deer effigy came around the front of the truck, skull gleaming white, running on all fours. I grabbed Foxy with my injured wrist and practically threw her into the house. I think I screamed something, probably shit, or maybe I just screamed because my wrist throbbed with a deep, nauseating, yes, something hiss, no broken pain. Bongo let out a low, awful growl and spun around, and I realized he was about to attack the damnable thing. I hauled him back by the collar and somehow we all fit inside the open doorway and I slammed the door in the effigy's face. It was the screen door. It smashed into the wire mesh, tore it open, and I fell down over Bongo while it poured through the opening, trying to get in. Foxy grabbed the inner door and kicked me hard. I had a split second of hurt confusion, then realized she was rowing me out of the way. The door hit the effigy with a sound like a baseball bat hitting a board, and then suddenly there was silence. I curled around my wrist and my dog, making small, ununu noises of agony. I needed a doctor. I needed this to not be happening. I needed the world to go back to being a place I understood. I was not going to get any of those things, so I let Foxy haul me to my feet. We stood there for a moment in an awkward half-embrace. Her lips were bluish and I knew that was bad and I knew there was nothing I could do about it. She pulled my jacket off me, which was confusing. When the sleeve went over my wrist, it was up there in the worst pains I've ever felt in my life. Then she started trying to put it back on me, which was even more confusing. What are you? Zip up the jacket with your bad arm in front, she said. It ain't a sling, but it's as good as we're gonna get in the next 5 minutes. I let her work the zipper. With my arm tucked under my breasts, it didn't feel good, but at least I wasn't banging it around. What do we do? I said. Wait until morning, I guess. Skip and Thomas'll come over to check on us. I had no idea what time it was. I had no idea what day it was. We can call them, I said, from the landline. If we just... I heard a clattering tock-tock-tock on the glass window and stiffened. It's at the window, isn't it? Yep. I turned. The sofa still blocked most of the window, but I could see a narrow sliver of glass to one side, and the deer skull gazed at me eyelessly through it. Tap, tap. You don't want me, I screamed at the effigy. You don't want me, I can't do what you want. It tilted its awful upside-down head. I would swear for an instant the damn thing looked confused. How much individuality did they have had this one imprinted on me as it hung in the tree, watching? Had it been separated from the others? Did it know that I wasn't able to make more of its masters? I don't know why I stared so long. I'd seen enough of the effigies to last a lifetime. But there it was, one leg raised to tap against the glass. Its rib cage looked oddly human from here. Maybe it was. Dear God, what was it made out of? Who was it made out of? The two headless ones that had followed Anna around, had they been made from the bones of her children, as I suspected, and this one I had thought of it as deer bones, but apart from the skull, I don't know a deer from a human. Cotgrave had died in the woods, and the scavengers had gotten to him. Coast casket funeral. Had the scavengers been simple animals, or something more? Who was in the effigy that looked in the window of Cotgrave's bedroom, who knocked on the front door of the house, trying to get in, trying to get back in? Of course, I whispered. You don't smash the windows of your own house. You tap on the glass and wait for someone to let you back in. Foxy gave me a worried look. You lost me, Hon. It's Cotgrave, I said. That effigy. It's made of Cotgrave. It's got to be. Your granddaddy had a deer's head. Okay, not just of Cotgrave. I shook my head. But that's why it keeps trying to get in. It doesn't want us. It wants to come home. I hope you're not suggesting we open the door and let it in, said Foxy. I shook my head. I wasn't quite that far gone. But what would it do? A little voice whispered in my head. Would it attack you? Was it even trying to attack you in the woods, or did it recognize its granddaughter and was trying to keep you from going up the hill? Maybe it would just go to Cotgrave's bedroom and curl up on the bed, sit in his favorite chair and read the paper. I bit my knuckle to keep from breaking into hysterical laughter. Come on, said Foxy. Just like last time. We just gotta wait until it goes away. Then we'll call Skip and Tomas and... Bongo began to growl again. She made an exasperated sound. Buddy, you're not helping. Yeah, Bongo, just ignore the monster at the door. That monster is old news now. I reached down to put my hand on his head and realized that he wasn't facing the door. He was facing down the hallway. Foxy, I said quietly. She turned to me, and I pointed. In the shadows of the hall, something moved. I remembered suddenly the way that there had seemed to be two effigies chasing us in the tunnel. I remembered the building, and that the effigies could reproduce themselves. I remembered these things much too late. That movement was our only warning before an effigy erupted from my grandmother's doll room. If it had been made entirely out of doll parts, I would probably have stood there and laughed high-pitched and awful while it took me apart. It would have been too much, too horrible, to move monster clear. The killer doll. The china doll with the long fingernails and the murderous expression. But the effigy was made out of many more things. Cockgrave's effigy had constructed it lovingly, vengefully, who knew out of the remnants of his dead wife's hoarding. Maybe that was why I saw it so rarely. Maybe it wasn't hiding during the day. Maybe it was busy working. The hoarding effigy was a package of old newspapers, layered like the building itself, furred with bits of cardboard boxes and old bottles of cleaner. There were doll parts, yes, dozens of them, little plastic limbs making up a rib cage built of bright pink severed legs, but they enclosed a jumble of wire coat hangers and broken plates. The ancient typewriter had been broken apart, and the letters, with their metal shafts, made claws that gouged the floor and tore the carpet runner into long stringy threads. I screamed. Foxy swore. Bongo's growl erupted into a high, awful bark, the sound of a dog desperately calling for help that he knows isn't going to come. I hauled Bongo back by the collar into the kitchen. We couldn't go out the door because the other effigy was there, and the back door was closed off, and I knew we were trapped like rats. I knew it, but I didn't know where else to go. The hoarding effigy had no such concerns. If it hadn't skidded when it hit the linoleum, I imagine we would have died right there. But as soon as it reached the kitchen, its legs went sideways and it crashed into the counter, and that bought us a small amount of time. We went up the stairs. I only had one hand and I had to use it on Bongo, but he didn't object to running. Foxy was right behind me, knocking boxes loose and throwing them down onto the effigy. Her heart might be about to give out, but she wasn't going down alone. At the top of the stairs, one door stood open. It was the room we'd watched the effigy from approximately 1,000 years ago. Some furniture, a man-high stack of old newspapers, and not much else. Foxy, in here. We slammed the door shut behind us. I set my back against it while Foxy, having two good arms, grabbed a nightstand and started dragging it over. The effigy hit the door with enough force to knock me forward an inch or two. I don't know if the metal claws made it hard to work doorknobs or if it didn't understand them, but it didn't seem to want to open the door so much as smash it down. I set my feet, trying to hold it until Foxy could get the furniture in place. This effigy did not seem interested in scaring us. This one wanted us dead. I thought of the gleeful malice that exuded from my grandmother's house and wasn't at all surprised. How could a creature made out of the essence of this place not want us all dead? This is bad, said Foxy. I knew it, I said. I thought I'd put doll parts in the truck and then there weren't any in the morning, and I thought I was nuts, but I wasn't. It took them. Cockgrave's effigy took them. That's all very interesting, said Foxy, but it's beating down the door, Hon. Yes, I'd noticed. The nightstand looked painfully fragile. I had enough space to brace the door with my good shoulder while she grabbed the other one. The door frame rocked with the effigy's blows. I heard wood splintering an inch from my head. Here's Johnny, I thought. And then, oh God, if only I had an axe. We've got to get out of here, I said. This isn't going to hold. There's the window, said Foxy. We can go out on the porch roof, but after that, we're running real thin on options. Slam, 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 sudden silence. I could hear claws clicking as the effigy stepped back from the door. What was it doing? I heard it walking down the hall into the next room. That one had been full of junk. A regular fire trap. An idea crystallized into my head, as cold and clear as ice. This house. This fucking awful house. Why had I fought so hard for it? Let the monsters have it. The only thing I cared about was my friend and my dog. Well, and my laptop, and that was still in the truck. Thank God. If I did it wrong, we were going to die. If I did nothing, we were still probably going to die. Foxy, I said quietly. You have a lighter, don't you? Yeah. Give it to me. She didn't ask questions, just dug into her purse and handed it over. It was an old Zippo, weighty in my hand. You about to do what I think you're about to do, Hon? Burn this place to the ground, you mean? Hey, it's your house. But I'd prefer to be outside before we do that. Well, jump down from the porch roof onto my truck. Foxy gave me a dubious look. Crack. The effigy hit the wall between us. Apparently it had decided that drywall was easier to get through than wood. It was right. Metal flashed as its claws shredded through the wallboard. I didn't know how much space there was between studs or if there were pipes in the way, but I wasn't about to stick around to find out. The truck, you say, said Foxy. Get the window open, I said. I bent down, flicked the Zippo open. God bless stupid teenage me, who had spent hours learning to flip open my boyfriend's Zippo so that I could look cool, and lit the stack of newspapers on fire. They caught with remarkable enthusiasm. I lit the carpet on fire just for good measure. The fire department could yell at me if we lived. There was a monster coming in through the wall, and I was in the top floor of a house, lighting it on fire, and what I felt was a sudden wild exhilaration. Let it burn. Let this awful place and its secrets and its nightmares and the dead I hadn't asked for and the junk I never wanted burn. The effigy got one of its arms through the wall and began tearing at the hole to widen it. I shoved the Zippo in my pocket. Foxy kicked the window screen out. I heard the cracking of the newspapers and smelled burning. It was a very cheerful, campfire sort of smell, desperately incongruous given the circumstances. I still don't know how we got Bongo through the window. I may have picked him up with one arm while Foxy pulled, but we got him out, and then I climbed out onto the porch roof after praying he didn't take it in his head to run off the edge and break his neck and my other wrist in the process. Now the truck, said Foxy. After the fire's caught, I said, looking over my shoulder. I want that thing to burn, not be chasing us around the woods. Can't argue with that. She eyed the distance to the truck. Think I can make it. Don't know how y'all convinced the dog to do it, but well, figure it out. Presumably Cockgrave's effigy was still on the porch somewhere. It had been trying to get into the house. I just had to hope that it had gotten in, and the fire would take it out too. Houses are supposed to catch fire really fast. In all the movies it goes from a shorted out Christmas tree light to flames shooting out of the roof in like 2 minutes. And you'd think this house, made of ancient materials and packed to the rafters with tinder, would practically explode into flame. We waited on the roof and it didn't happen. I could still see the orange flicker on the walls, and obviously something inside was on fire, but my hope that the whole place would turn into an inferno and take the effigy with it was starting to fade. Okay, I said. Let's get to the truck. The hoarder effigy hit the open window like a freight train. Its shoulders were too broad to get through. It turned and scrabbled at the windowsill, cracking the wood, slamming into it over and over. Bits of bone flew off. I watched one of the dog ribs pop loose, then another, as it tried to drag itself through. Something went f-woo-wash. I don't know what caught, but suddenly the fire was no longer an orange glow but alive. It roared as if it was inhaling, and I heard glass shattering as the windows broke. Come on, shouted Foxy. I could barely hear her over the fire, but when I turned, she was standing on top of my truck, Bongo in her arms. Get the hell out of there. The effigy strained at the window. Another set of ribs broke off. Parts of its papery guts were spilling out onto the roof, and then a spark hit them and they too began to burn. I ran for the corner of the porch roof. Foxy and Bongo slid down into the bed of the truck and I vaulted the gap like an Olympic sprinter. I had been secretly afraid I'd come up short, and instead I nearly went over the other side. The roof rack stopped me. There was going to be an almighty dent in the roof, but who the hell cared anymore? I flung myself into the bed over the side and opened the driver's side door. It seemed like an eternity while I dug for the keys. Come on, mouse, this is not the time to realize you've left them on the coffee table, but found them in the bottom of my pocket and slammed them into the ignition. The truck started. My beautiful, faithful truck. I slammed it into reverse, glanced behind me out of habit, and then the burning effigy landed on the hood. The truck hood dented under its weight. I didn't care about that. A truck without dents in it is probably a stupid truck anyway, but it was touching my truck. I didn't even let boyfriends drive my truck. Get it off, get it off, get it off. This is mine, this is mine. You can't touch it, it's on me. Get it off. It glared at me eyelessly, its sides heaving as if were panting. The plastic doll legs had charred and melted. So had most of the bottles. One burned like a star, some kind of accelerant, God only knows what. If it could get to me, I would burn too. If it could get to me, it would take me apart, and then Cotgrave's effigy would come along and build me back up out of bones, and all three of us would roam the woods together in a family, clicking and clacking with stones in our chest and ribs made of doll arms, and we could twist ourselves around like the twisted ones and lie down like the dead ones. And I slammed my foot on the accelerator. Foxy and Bongo had thrown themselves flat in the truck bed. Maybe it didn't know they were there. Maybe it didn't care. I don't know. Maybe there was something of my grandmother in it, and there was no one she hated like her own flesh and blood. I shot down the driveway in reverse while it clawed at the windshield with the typewriter keys, leaving huge scrapes in the paint and scratching the glass. It got a claw hooked under the windshield wipers, and somehow it held on, even when the truck went off the driveway and hit the ditch and bounced hard. I had one hand to drive with, and steering wasn't helping. I threw the car into drive and plowed forward until I nearly hit the burning porch, then slammed on the brakes. I heard a yelp from the back, but I didn't dare stop to check on my passengers. The effigy slid off the hood and rolled in the front yard, painted orange by the flames leaping from the roof. It didn't move. I backed the truck away, leaving ruts in the yard, and then Cotgrave's effigy came down from the porch. I gritted my teeth, ready to run it down if I had to, but I didn't. It ignored the truck. It picked its way down the stairs, moving on 4 legs, down to the burning effigy. Then it curled itself up, like Bongo does when he goes to sleep, and lay down against the other one. Cotgrave and his wife, I thought, watching the flames from the hoarder effigy lick across the deer hide. Or Cotgrave and his house. Maybe it doesn't matter which. The roof fell in, and I pulled down the driveway and away from that terrible ruined house forever. 24. Well, that is the end of the story, or at least of most of it. Once we were a few miles away, Foxy banged on the back window until I pulled over. Then she drove me to the ER and spun a story I can't even remember about squatters breaking into the house and a fire. My wrist was broken, but at least it was my left wrist, so I could still drive after they put it in the cast. Officer Bob came out to take my statement. I told him I didn't know much. I hadn't seen anybody I could pick out of a lineup. It had been dark, and Bongo was the only reason I woke up at all, and probably the only reason I hadn't died in the fire. I don't know if he believed me, but he was kind about it, and that counted for a lot. At some point Foxy left. Tomas came and got her. I think she must have called from the ER. I kept asking if she would be okay in the house, if the house was safe now, if anything would happen. There were other people around, so I couldn't say what I wanted to, just grabbed her sleeve and stared at her. "It's all right," she said. "It's all right. They never wanted me. Ain't got the parts they need. I been there for years and nothing's ever happened. A long time later I thought that maybe Anna might want revenge, but by then Foxy was long gone, and all I could do was beg Officer Bob to look in on them and make sure they were all right. Pretty much as soon as they released me from the ER, I got in my truck and drove into town. Enid took one look at me and let me sleep in the back of the coffee shop for a couple of hours. I told her there had been a fire, but I honestly didn't remember much. When I had about 5 hours of sleep in me, I drove to Pittsburgh. I stopped only at brightly lit places. Even those were too dim. I wanted the world to be lit up with halogens, with great blazes of artificial light. I wanted to see every corner of the world so I knew nothing could be hiding in it. I tuned the radio to something loud and brassy and sang along with everything, whether I knew the words or not. I got home and sat in the truck for probably an hour. Bongo was confused but had gotten a cheeseburger at the last stop, so he was in a congenial mood. The DJ came on to tell us what the last song had been, and I was puzzled for a moment that I wasn't being told about how my pledge would help support quality programming like this, and then I put my forehead on the steering wheel and cried hysterically for what felt like another hour. Then I went inside and turned on every light in the house. I never told my dad the truth. How could I? The official word was that I was asleep and somebody broke in, and Bongo woke me up. There was a struggle and my wrist got broken and a fire started somewhere in all the junk. Foxy was drinking out on the front porch and heard Bongo freaking out, so she came and managed to pull me out. I was still confused from being half asleep and it was dark. No, I don't know who'd break in. No, I didn't get a good look at anybody. Dad apologized for how it had all gone down, and I told him there was no way he could have known. The doctor's got him pretty well medicated right now, trying to deal with the rattle in his lungs. I don't know how much longer he's got, and I'm not going to tear up what piece he's got trying to tell him the truth. The insurance company didn't investigate the fire too hard. The place had obviously been a fire trap and we went asking for money to rebuild just to have someone with a backhoe knock the whole place down and fill in the basement. Foxy says the stone's gone. I don't know if they did that or if it was someone else. If it really was a signpost, maybe the effigies came and fetched it back now that they didn't need it anymore. I prefer to think it was the people with the backhoe. The insurance company sent Dad what remained from the settlement and he sent it to me. I looked at the check, $6,000, a lot of money by my standards, and started crying. I needed the money and I couldn't keep it. Even the thought of cashing that check made me want to throw up. Anything I bought with that money would be tainted. If I tried to make a house payment with it, then my grandmother would own a little bit of my house. I couldn't do it. I tried to send it to Foxy, and she refused. I ain't gonna take money for arson, hon. I tossed and turned for 3 nights before I finally got an idea and sent the whole damn thing to North Carolina Public Radio in memory of Freddie Cotgrave. I got the tax break, and maybe that's worth something. Obviously the green book was never found. If it didn't burn, it's probably buried somewhere in the pile of rubble left from the house. I've got the manuscript, though. I didn't want that either, but Tomas had been reading it back at Fox's place when the house burned. They put it in an envelope and mailed it to me. It was a repeat of the insurance check. I cried. I wanted to throw up. I put it in the trash. I went back out and took it out of the trash. I tried to put it in a drawer and it felt like there was a snake in the room. Every time I went into the back bedroom, I could feel it lurking there. Eventually I rented a safe deposit box. They're not that expensive, as it turns out. Now the bank can worry about it. I suppose it goes without saying that I've pretty well lost my shit. My aunt wants me to see a therapist, but what am I going to tell them? There's no therapist in the world who will believe the truth, and I don't want to have to sit and lie to someone for $60 an hour. Hell, how do you tell someone, I nearly spent the rest of my life giving birth to monsters in a city full of walking sticks and bones, they'd have you on antipsychotics so fast that your head would spin, and that wouldn't help. I wish to God there was a medication that would make it all go away, but if there was, maybe I'd forget to watch for holler people. Maybe I wouldn't be so lucky next time. It's better than it was. Bongo helps a lot. I can leave the house, and as long as I'm in my truck or someplace with people, I'm pretty okay. I put hickory twigs in all the windows, but that just looks like a weird decorating choice. Do you know what I think about the most, though it's not Cotgrave's effigy, lonely and wandering the woods near his dead wife's house until he had a chance to build her up again out of parts? It's not the stones or the Voorish dome or the fact that there's got to be other cities out there like the one in Wales, maybe less dead, full of the holler people and their servants. It's the linoleum in my grandmother's kitchen. When the hoarder effigy reached the kitchen, it skidded. Its feet nearly went out from under it. That's probably the only reason we made it to the stairs. 3 whole lives hinging on shitty 70s linoleum. If she'd left the original hardwood, we'd be dead. Everybody talks about how awful it is that people cover up the nice wood floors in houses, and it turned out to save my life. I feel like the world must be full of things like that. Stupid minor things nobody pays attention to, and then one day you pick up the umbrella stand you've been meaning to throw out and beat the killer over the head with it, or you trip over the pizza boxes that you meant to throw out and the killer gets you instead. Things like dog leashes or hickory beads. I still carry the beads with me. If I leave them at home, I panic and have to go back. They've become a security blanket. As long as I've got them, I can probably see the holler people coming. Foxy and I still talk. Well, text mostly. After our little jaunt, she allowed us how a cell phone might be useful to have around, and Tomas set her up with a cheap one. She likes texting. I think she'd communicate entirely in emojis and smiley faces if she could. Skip is fine. Tomas gets hassled sometimes by people who think that anybody like him must be from another country, but that's nothing new. Foxy went on a new heart medication after Skip badgered her into it. She says it makes her cranky, but I remember how blue her lips would get, and I'm glad she's on it. No effigies in the woods. No holler people. If they're still back there, and of course they're still back there, everything's very quiet. Why don't you move? I asked her one of the few times that we talked instead of texting. With what money? Asked Foxy. Ain't nobody gonna buy this crappy piece of dirt out here, and my social security ain't gonna pay for a house anywhere else. I could help, I promised recklessly. Half the time my own mortgage was a struggle, but I'd bring all 3 of them up to Pittsburgh if I had to. Nah. It's fine, hon. No different from living by a dump or one of them toxic waste things. I keep my hickory and I don't go walking in the woods on that side. A long silence. I heard the soft static of the line. Even after I got my phone fixed, Fox's connection wasn't good. I wondered if she was thinking about Anna too. I should hate Anna for what she did. I know I should. She would have sold me for her own freedom without a second thought. But I think of what it must have been like walking the corridors of that dead city, seeing nothing but monsters around you. When she found out she was pregnant, was she hopeful? Did she think that maybe it would be more company than Uriah and the effigies? And what kind of monstrous midwife had attended her? What claws of bone and twig and why reached out to catch her firstborn? Was it easier after she stopped being able to carry a child? It doesn't work anymore. I can't do what they want. Did she just stop caring, or was she still hoping? Every time did she plead her case to the building, to the things hanging from the ceiling? Did they have a long, rattling conference about her fate? In the end, did the effigies drag her to the white stone anyway? Sometimes at night I wake up thinking her, and that if I turn my head I'll find out that I didn't get out of the dome after all. If I open my eyes there will be effigies around me, and the weight on my legs won't be Bongo but something made out of his bones. It takes me a long time after that to turn on the light. No, I don't hate Anna. If she hadn't called me, maybe I'd be able to sleep at night. Maybe I wouldn't think about monsters pressing against the walls of the world, effigies making more and more copies of themselves, waiting for their masters to come home, or until they overflow the hills and break through. But I still can't hate her. Sometimes I even feel guilty. Here I am, trembling and quaking in the dark, at the mere possibility of taking her place. What right do I have to be so broken, when she carried on, year after year, decade after decade? All those years in the dead city, and she survived. I couldn't have done that. Maybe that was the gift of her inhuman blood, that she didn't kill herself or curl into a ball and give up. The Lady Cassap, the narrator of the